The air in Ouagadougou was heavy that night, thick with heat, thicker with silence. It was the kind of silence that clung to the walls, that made even seasoned guards twitch at the creak of a floorboard. At the heart of the capital, the presidential palace stood bathed in pale moonlight, silent and majestic. No alarms, no sirens, just the illusion of peace. But beneath that peace, something was coming. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his private briefing chamber, a room buried deep beneath the palace, sealed with reinforced concrete and shadowed by years of secrets. Before him, a single folder lay open. Inside, intercepted communications, movement logs, bank transactions, all pointing to one terrifying conclusion. A coup was hours away. But this wasn't the usual kind. No ragtag rebels from the bush. No mercenaries and civilian pickup trucks. This was different. It was silent. It was surgical. And the men behind it didn't come from outside, they came from within. Soldiers, officers, many once called brothers, and they wanted him dead. Earlier that day, an unmarked call had reached the Ministry of Security. No caller ID, no traceable origin, just a voice. Calm, measured. The strike is planned for Wednesday night. They're already inside. Within minutes, the machinery of state security had begun to spin in complete silence. No mobilization orders, no public declarations, just quiet moves in the shadows. Dormitories searched, comms shut down, names crossed off lists. They weren't stopping an invasion. They were dismantling a ghost. The plan, according to intel, had been months in the making. A one-night operation. One man, one bullet, strike the palace, silence resistance, announce a new leadership before dawn. But it wasn't just about power. It was about collapse. The goal wasn't to rule Burkina Faso, it was to destroy it. Chaos, not conquest. Traoré closed the file and leaned back. His fingers tapped the wood of the armrest as if feeling for answers. Who were they really? What did they want? And more importantly, who had warned him? Security Minister Mohamed Ousana had phrased it bluntly. This isn't just treason, it's architecture. The conspirators didn't come with rifles. They came with clearance codes, hallway access, knowledge of guard rotations. They knew the palace like it was their home because once it had been. Former officers, some still on payroll, others exiled but deeply connected. They had vanished from official rosters, but never from the game, and they'd nearly succeeded. Had the warning come a day later, Captain Ibrahim Traoré might have been just a name carved into a memorial. But now he was a man who knew too much. By midnight, the first arrests had begun. Quiet, surgical, just like the coup had been meant to be. One by one, men were taken from their beds, phones seized, uniforms removed. Some didn't even realize the operation had been aborted. They were still waiting for the signal, but it would never come. Traoré, moved to a secure location hours before, watched the whole thing unfold through encrypted feeds. No resistance, no firefight, just silence, deadly, damning silence. A silence that spoke louder than bullets, the kind of silence that says, this isn't over. Because what had just been stopped was not a mutiny. It was a message from the past, from those who had once ruled, those who had been removed by Traoré's reforms, and who now watched from the shadows with resentment burning in their veins. They had failed tonight, but the blueprint remained, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré understood the truth. This was not a final act. They called him Sadu, a name that no longer showed up in military registries, but still sent a chill through the ranks of Burkina Faso's northern defense zones. Once a tactical operations commander known for his brutal efficiency, Sadu had vanished from the battlefield months before the coup attempt. Now, intelligence reports claimed he was back in the capital, in the shadows. He wasn't alone. Buried in the aftermath of the failed coup was something more insidious than betrayal. The names that surfaced in the investigation weren't unknowns. They weren't rebels from remote provinces or hot-blooded young officers chasing dreams of glory. These were men with medals, men who had stood beside Traoré during the early days of the revolution, men who had saluted the flag, then quietly walked away when their influence began to erode. They didn't disappear. They regrouped. The true planners of the operation were scattered across borders, many of them in quiet exile in Ivory Coast, Abidjan, Yamoussoukro, Bouaké. They weren't fugitives. They were guests, living in villas, attending business conferences, hosting consulting dinners. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Their names carried weight. Even now, the intelligence report labeled them as part of a shadow council. A loose alliance of former officers, political outcasts, and disillusioned strategists. They had no flag, no formal hierarchy, no written doctrine, but they shared something more potent, A vision, not to reclaim power, but to dismantle the new order. The fall of Traoré, they believed, would be only the beginning. What came next would be a reconstruction not by the people, but by international actors. They had already laid the foundation, sowing instability, creating cracks in governance, orchestrating psychological warfare through rumors and doubt. A state made weak from within would invite salvation from without. Collapse is currency. One intercepted memo read, "And Burkina Faso is broke in all the right ways." Traoré's government traced encrypted messages routed through phones registered in southern Ivorian districts, places with minimal oversight and maximum access. Bank transactions linked to NGO cover accounts had spiked just days before the coup. Shell companies moved money in 4 currencies, and satellite phones pinged off towers stretching from the Sahel to the Atlantic coast. In Abidjan, former Colonel Amadou Diallo, once a favorite of the Blaise Compaoré era, had re-emerged. Not as a soldier, but a strategic advisor for a private logistics firm. His name appeared again and again in quiet financial flows. Weapons procurement, housing arrangements, even psychological operations experts flown in from abroad under diplomatic pretense. And then there was the Whisper campaign. Across barracks in Ouagadougou, doubts had begun to fester weeks before the attempted coup. Traoré was too young, they said, too radical. He had cut ties with France, turned down Western military support, aligned himself with Mali and Niger to form the alliance of Sahel states. It was brave or foolish, depending on who you asked. Some feared he was isolating Burkina Faso. Others whispered that he was inviting ruin. The doubt spread not through formal orders, but through voices of elders, clerics, tribal leaders, people the soldiers trusted. It wasn't mutiny, it was erosion. By the time the coup failed, parts of the army were already fractured in spirit, if not in action. In the days that followed, Traoré stood before his inner circle, the weight of betrayal etched deep into his face. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. This was not just treason, he told them. It was a test run. The pieces fit too cleanly. The silence of the Ivorian government, the neutrality that wasn't truly neutral, the sudden disappearance of certain officers weeks before the event, border crossings that had gone unreported. Intelligence sources now believed 6 individuals involved in the planning had entered Burkina Faso, posing as aid workers and international observers. And still, there was no official word from Ivory Coast, no denial, no condemnation, just silence. But silence, Traoré knew, was not the absence of intent, it was strategy. And now, Burkina Faso faced a reality more terrifying than invasion. Betrayal with a postal address, a foreign safe haven just a few hours' drive from its own capital, a launch pad that could host the next plot, or the one after that. One captured conspirator had said it in passing. "We don't need to win, we just need to make sure no one else does." It was then that Traoré understood something crucial. The real war wasn't for power. It was for narrative. Control of the future required control of the story. And in this story, he was being painted as the rogue, the extremist, the destabilizer. That narrative had to be broken. As investigations deepened, one truth became clearer than ever. The coup attempt was not a spontaneous insurrection. It was a calculated, coordinated geopolitical maneuver. One meant not just to remove him, but to reset the rules of the region. And this time, they had failed. But in exile, in compounds shielded by silence, the architects remained, watching, waiting. Ouagadougou, 1 week after the failed coup, was no longer a city of dim streetlights or dusty roads. It had become a chessboard. A chessboard where every piece could be a traitor. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood by the window of a secure meeting room, gazing down at the central square where crowds still gathered, chanting his name as a symbol of hope, but he didn't hear their cheers. In his mind, there was only one sound: whispers. The whispers never stopped. They came from the dark corners of tea stalls in the market, from encrypted messages on cheap burner phones, from hushed conversations among senior officers. Traoré has gone too far. He's selling the country to the Russians. He can't keep the peace. Whispers didn't need evidence, just repetition until they became truth. But Traoré wasn't concerned with the whispers of the masses. He was focused on the whispers from the desert, from the arid northern regions of Burkina Faso, where terrorist groups like JNIM and ISGS still operated, and where his former allies might now be colluding with enemies. The latest intelligence report revealed a chilling truth. Some of the officers arrested in the coup attempt had previously been stationed in Dori and Djibo, the army's last strongholds against insurgent expansion. They didn't just know how to defeat the military. They knew how to let the insurgents win. Traoré summoned Security Minister Mohamed Ousana and a small group of trusted advisors to a windowless room, swept for listening devices twice daily. On the table lay a detailed map of the Sahel, with red lines marking weapons smuggling routes from Libya through Mali to Burkina Faso. Another dossier listed financial transactions. Millions of euros funneled through accounts in Dubai, Switzerland, and even Nigeria. But what caught Traoré's attention most was a name, General Moussa Keïta. Keïta had been a senior commander in Burkina Faso's army under Blaise Compaoré, a man known for his ability to manipulate both friends and foes. After Compaoré's ousting in 2014, Keïta vanished from the radar, leaving only rumors that he was living in Abidjan, working as a security consultant for gold mining companies. Now, his name appeared in encrypted messages between the arrested officers. Keïta wasn't just a shadow, he was the orchestrator. He doesn't want power, Ousana said, his voice low. He wants revenge, and he has the connections to get it. Traoré nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the map. Revenge wasn't the only thing driving Keïta. A man like him didn't work alone. Who was behind him? The gold mining companies in Ivory Coast, the oil conglomerates in Nigeria, or a larger force, one capable of turning Burkina Faso into a pawn in a global geopolitical game? The answer, it turned out, lay in the north. An intelligence source from Mali reported that Keïta had met with representatives from a European private security firm in Bamako just 2 months earlier. The firm, headquartered in Paris, specialized in protection services for gold and uranium mines in the Sahel, but their operations went beyond protection. They trained mercenaries, supplied weapons, and occasionally arranged political accidents. Traoré realized this wasn't just an internal conspiracy, it was part of a larger plan. With Burkina Faso as a mere piece of the puzzle, if he failed, the country would descend into chaos, and those behind Keïta would step in to restore order at the cost of Burkina Faso's sovereignty. He decided to act. A special task force was formed, not to attack, but to gather intelligence. They would infiltrate smuggling routes in the north, posing as traitors or local militiamen. Their goal, uncover the links between Keïta, the insurgents, and foreign backers. Meanwhile, Traoré ordered heightened security in Ouagadougou, but not through military mobilization that would spark panic. Instead, he deployed civilian intelligence units, blending into crowds, listening, observing, and reporting. But even as he built his network, Traoré couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not by guns or knives, but by invisible eyes, by hands pulling strings from afar. One evening, as he left his office, a slip of paper was slipped into his coat pocket. No one knew where it came from. Inside was a single line, "They know what you've seen." Traoré burned the paper, but its message lingered in his mind. Who were they? And more importantly, who had sent the warning? An ally, an enemy playing mind games, or someone straddling the line. In the desert, the whispers never stopped, and Traoré knew that to survive, he had to learn to listen and to respond. On the 10th day after the failed coup, a small explosion shook the main market in Ouagadougou. No one died. But the message was clear. The stability Traoré promised was under siege. International media quickly picked up the story, calling the blast evidence of unrest under his leadership. Articles in major newspapers in Paris and London cited anonymous sources claiming Traoré was losing control, that his military was divided, and the terrorist groups were exploiting the chaos to expand their territory. Traoré sat in the meeting room, scrolling through headlines on his laptop. He wasn't angry. He was used to media games. But what troubled him was the coordination too perfect, too swift. The explosion, the articles, and the rumors spreading on social media all emerged almost simultaneously. This wasn't coincidence. It was a campaign. We're being attacked from the outside, he told Ousana and his advisors. But the enemy isn't a nation. It's a system. That system, as intelligence reports gradually revealed, was a complex web of private security firms, resource tycoons, and foreign intelligence agencies. General Moussa Keïta, now confirmed to be in Abidjan, was not just a disgruntled former officer. He was a middleman, connecting international interests to local conspiracies. Leaked documents from a server in Bamako showed Keïta had received millions of euros from a Canadian-based gold mining company, funneled through accounts in Ivory Coast. In return, he promised security for gold mines in northern Burkina Faso. but only if Traoré was removed. But Keita wasn't the only player. Another figure, more elusive, began appearing in reports, a man known as Le Courtier the Broker. No one knew his true identity. Some said he was a former French intelligence operative. Others claimed he was a Lebanese businessman operating in West Africa. But all agreed on one thing. Le Courtier was the one moving money, weapons, and information between the parties in the conspiracy. Traoré ordered the Northern Task Force to intensify their efforts. They devised a bold plan: pose as insurgents to infiltrate a secret training camp near the Mali border. According to sources, the camp wasn't just training mercenaries, it was where Keita and Le Courtier met with representatives from foreign companies. If the task force could capture photos, recordings, or any evidence, they could expose the entire network. But the mission was far from easy. The Mali-Burkina Faso border was a gray zone, where no laws applied, only survival. The task force faced sandstorms, scorching heat, and the constant risk of detection by insurgents or mercenaries. A single mistake could wipe out the entire team. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré faced a different battlefield. Public trust. Small protests erupted in the suburbs, fueled by rumors that he was hiding the truth about the coup. Some even accused him of staging the market explosion to consolidate power. Traoré knew he couldn't rely solely on the military to keep the country stable. He needed a narrative, a story stronger than the enemy's whispers. He decided to address the public, not in his military uniform, but in the traditional attire of the Mossi, Burkina Faso's largest ethnic group. In a televised speech, he spoke of a dream for an independent Burkina Faso, free from foreign manipulation. He didn't promise instant peace, but he promised truth. "We are under attack," he said, "not by bombs, but by lies. But we will prevail, because we know what we're fighting for." The speech spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags supporting Traoré trended on social media, not just in Burkina Faso, but in Mali, Niger, and even Senegal. But Traoré knew that words, no matter how powerful, couldn't shield him from the knives in the dark. That night, the task force sent an encrypted message. They had infiltrated the training camp. They had seen Le Courtier, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, speaking French with a southern accent. But before they could gather evidence, a sudden insurgent attack forced them to retreat. One team member was gravely wounded, and their equipment was destroyed. Traoré read the report, a chill running down his spine. They had come too close, but the enemy knew they were coming. Someone had betrayed them. 3 weeks after the failed coup, Ouagadougou was still far from normal. Security measures were tightened, but the atmosphere remained heavy. Traoré knew time was not on his side. Each passing day, the whispers grew louder, the doubts deeper, but he also knew his enemies were growing impatient. They had failed once, and they wouldn't wait long to try again. The Northern Task Force's report offered a faint glimmer of hope, though they hadn't secured direct evidence. They confirmed that Le Courtier was not an independent actor. He worked for a larger conglomerate, based in Europe, with branches in Dubai and Johannesburg. The conglomerate didn't just mine gold and uranium. It invested in war, supplying weapons and training to whoever paid the most. Traoré shifted his strategy. Instead of chasing shadows in the desert, he would strike at the heart of the network: money. He ordered Burkina Faso's financial agencies to collaborate with counterparts in Mali and Niger, to track money flows from Ivory Coast and Nigeria. Simultaneously, he reached out to leaders of the Alliance of Sahel states, proposing a joint campaign to disrupt weapons smuggling routes across borders. But Traoré's boldest move was to reveal part of the truth. In an international press conference, he disclosed that the coup was not just an internal plot, but part of a larger scheme to control Burkina Faso's resources. He didn't name Keita or Le Courtier, but released documents showing foreign companies had funded destabilizing activities in the Sahel. "We are not fighting a nation," he said. "We are fighting greed." The speech sent shockwaves globally. The implicated companies issued swift denials, but the damage was done. Investors began pulling funds from gold mining operations in West Africa, and European governments were forced to launch investigations. In Abidjan, General Moussa Keita suddenly vanished from his villa, leaving behind only an empty suitcase and a destroyed phone. But Traoré knew this victory was temporary. Le Courtier was still out there, and his network wouldn't collapse easily. More importantly, he faced a painful question: who among his closest allies had betrayed him? His advisors were loyal, or so he wanted to believe. But the note in his pocket, the attack on the task force, and the unending whispers all pointed to one truth. The enemy was not only outside. One night, as he sat alone in his office, an encrypted message arrived from an unknown source. It contained a single line: "Le courtier is coming to Ouagadougou. Trust no one." Traoré stared at the screen, feeling the world close in around him. He didn't know who sent the message, but he knew one thing: the light after the storm had not yet arrived, and when it did, it would come at a steep cost. The story ends with Traoré standing by the window, looking out at Ouagadougou's night sky. He was not an invincible hero. He was a man confronting the shadows of himself, his country, and a world that never stopped playing the game of power. But he would not stop, because in his heart, Burkina Faso was not just a nation, it was a promise.